In today's deep dive, we ask whether the business of professional sports has made American athletes too chummy with one another. How important are true rivalries to American sports, and what happens when every athlete sounds like a politician? But before we get to the deep dive, our quick five. Why did the Chiefs break my heart over the weekend? Does presidential attendance at sporting events heighten the ceremony or just needlessly inject politics? In somewhat related news, what happens if Stephen A. Smith is serious and actually runs for president? Now that Shohei Ohtani's interpreter has been sentenced, how does that gambling scandal look almost a year later? And what do the NBA trades this season tell us about the importance of locker room dynamics on player value? I'm Jason Kander. I'm joined by Ravi Gupta and probably at some point during the show, Adisu Demisi. Welcome back to The Game Within, where we talk about the business and politics of sports and how each shapes what happens on the field.
Well, let's go with number one, and it looks like Adisu is here. Super Bowl. A historic performance by the Kansas City Chiefs. Historic. Maybe the worst loss in Super Bowl history, next to my Bills getting their asses kicked against the Cowboys when I was a child. This was truly remarkable, honestly. And, you know, for a lot of people who've had a lot of things to say about how durable this Chiefs dynasty is, like your boy Bill Simmons, seemed pretty happy, Jason. I know you were talking about how much you loved Bill Simmons' podcast 2 weeks before that. Did you get a chance to tune in this week?
No, I did not. You know what's been really hard about this week is that I have been using, like all of us, sports to actively avoid the rest of the news. And now, over the past, since Sunday night,
welcome to my hell.
Yeah, my fingers, they remember to go to certain things on my phone, and then I'm like, no, stop.
Delete, back.
What do I do now? Spend time with my family? I mean, it's been really hard. And I feel like I don't know. All I can say about it is that you got to hand it to us, us being the Chiefs, of which I am not a member, but, you know, here in Kansas City, we do everything in a pretty spectacular fashion. And, you know, Patrick Mahomes has been a starter for 7 seasons. He has a remarkable 3-2 record in Super Bowls. And those 2 losses, I will say this, we in Kansas City were not subjected to nail-biting finishes in those. I mean, that was the upside. I didn't eat quite as much junk food. I wasn't quite as stressed. I was unhappy. But no, it was all around not fun. Good for the Eagles. I'm happy for their fan base.
Ravi, and good for Ravi for being able to take a victory lap after 2 weeks ago.
Look, this is not a victory for me. It's really a victory for the American people.
Oh, stop.
Honestly, and for white cornerbacks everywhere. I wanted Cooper. I wanted Cooper DeJean on the Bills. He was the pick I wanted, and it was kind of bummer to see him. But the Eagles know how to draft. Jason, you and I were texting about this during the game. Howie Roseman, probably the best GM in football, because look, like, you know, if you're Brandon Beane or whoever the heck the Chiefs GM is, I guess Andy Reid makes those decisions. Brett Veach. You know, those guys both got the big pick, right? Which you can give people credit for. But like, I think like the most impressive GMing is when, like, regardless of quarterback, which is a crapshoot in many ways, like, how are you drafting the rest of it? I think the Chiefs GM is really good. I think the Eagles GM is probably the best because he knows how to build the trenches. Every year, it seems like they have strong offensive and defensive lines.
Yeah, Kelsey retires and they don't miss a beat. In fact, it's like they're even better on the offensive line, not to mention, obviously, that defensive line. And, you know, they lost Nakobe Dean, a couple of weeks ago. And it's just like, oh, let's just slot this other guy in who makes an incredible interception, you know, and that basically sealed the game in the first half. And that guy wasn't even I don't think he was on the team. I think he was a free agent signing. He wasn't even the starting middle linebacker 4 weeks ago. It's just an impressive amount of talent, I guess, on the team. So sorry, Jason, we're dancing on your grave.
Well, Jason, yeah. And look, I know it's probably doubly tough, Jason, and this is our number 2 today, is Donald Trump was at the Super Bowl. And Jason, you and I have been talking about this for a little while. He seems awfully fond of your team and of the family that surrounds your star quarterback. How do you feel about that?
I don't feel about it. That's how I do it. But what I will say is that, look, Donald Trump, regardless of your politics, everybody, I think, pretty well acknowledges that Donald Trump gravitates toward people who say nice things about him. There are members of the Chiefs who have not done that. There are members of the Chiefs who have said nice things about Joe Biden. But look, the Eagles, when they won the Super Bowl a few years ago, a bunch of them decided not to go to the White House while he was president. So that's that for the Eagles. Plus, everybody knows the Laurie family are, I think, Democrats. I mean, given that one of them once raised money for me, and I don't even want to say where because it's going to make me that much more out of touch sounding. But my point is, I think that's how Trump. It's kind of weird, but I think that's how Trump chooses his sports, like fandom now. But like you and I have been over this over and over again offline.
I'm still not satisfied with your answers.
It's totally ridiculous. We have a kicker who wants to be a senator, and other than that, there's really not much going on. People tried to make a thing out of Travis Kelce's answer. I thought that was very unfair to Travis Kelce. Somebody asked him, "What do you think about Trump showing up to the game?" And it's a lose-lose answer, right? Like, and I don't mean in the sense that like where Michael Jordan said, "Hey, Republicans buy sneakers too." I mean, it's a lose-lose answer because you're trying to prepare your team for the Super Bowl and you're trying not to create any distractions whatsoever. You're trying to be responsible. I'm sure in his mind, he was thinking about the fact that ever since he did an ad for Pfizer, he's had social media death threats from the right. And by the way, his girlfriend, who he's very serious about, the president of the United States literally said, "I hate her." Like, I mean, I'm sure what he wanted to say was different, but all he could say was, "Hey, it's a big honor when any president comes to see you play." Because what else is he supposed to say?
We're going to get to this later. This is, I think, a symptom of something beyond the Chiefs, which is this media trainedness. Like, I would love for him to talk, like, if somebody, whether he's the president or not, attacks Jill Adisu, and then people are like, is it an honor to play in front of them? I'd hope you have more to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I would, but I also don't have sponsorship deals and to Jason's point, a team to not distract behind me.
Yeah, it's the distraction.
So
you don't have those sponsorship deals yet. Wait till you get to read hymns on this podcast.
but I get it. Like it is one of those questions where like the reporter is looking for you to
make news,
give an answer, period, and make news. And, we all come from politics. Like we teach our candidates or when we are candidates, we know to spot a trap when we see it and dodge the question. And to Kelce's, I guess, credit, he was kind of trying to dodge the question. He just didn't do it particularly well, or certainly enough people interpreted him not doing it well enough that like it created a firestorm anyway. But his number one goal, I think, Jason, you're 100% right, was to avoid the question. He just, he's not as practiced, I guess, at avoiding the question as he maybe should be.
I'm not sure how you would answer that question better than he. I mean, he said, he didn't say anything about Trump individually. He just said, "Yeah, I mean, it's an honor to have any president come and watch you play." I mean, I literally don't know what else he could have said.
I think what I saw a lot on social too was like the juxtaposition with Hertz, who was dismissive, I guess, of the question, and by association of Trump. And so it was like I saw a lot of juxtaposition about what Hertz did versus what Kelce did.
True.
But I'm with you. Like it was much ado about nothing.
I think Hertz came out, obviously. He had a breakout week in many different ways. People were talking about
the Super Bowl.
Won the Super Bowl, won the MVP of the Super Bowl. His all-female media team. I thought his Trump answer was appropriate, especially given how Trump has treated the Eagles, which is weird.
Which also makes it
delivered him the presidency.
Yeah, but it makes it easier because Trump has treated the team poorly. So answering that way is unlikely to be a distraction for your team. Whereas people have tried their darndest to make the personal politics of the players on the Chiefs a story, and they, with the exception of Harrison Butker, who is the kicker, they have tried to go out of their way not to do that.
Fair.
I mean, he's the
Kelce beef, to the extent that Travis Kelce has beef with Donald Trump, it's because of his girlfriend. It's not necessarily because I don't know Travis Kelce's politics. I can guess, but I don't know. But Ravi's point is also a good one, which is came after your girl, man. Like you might, you have a little bit of license to get your back up about that. With that said, it's Super Bowl week. Like, I get it. If this were 6 months from now, like, then I would have a little less sympathy for Kelsey. It looked like a wuss,
Right.
standing down.
I'm
But
sure he's going to have more to say about it in the future.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and so like possibly in the off season. But okay, that's not the thrust of all we're going to talk about with Trump here going. It's, I think, also just about like the politicization of sports. And this is by both sides. You know, I mean, Trump has done it a lot, particularly with football. He's tried to put like a masculinity test on football. And in fact, left at halftime and said it was because he's upset about the kickoffs, which I thought was kind of odd because, like, you know, not a lot of people watch football for the kickoff. I just like, it's typically a touchback anyway, even before they changed the rules. I just thought that was an interesting.
Yeah. Well, you had all this other DEI stuff going on around the NFL too. The end racism stuff being taken from the end zone, which I had said long before this. I can't remember if it was on Majority 54 that there is not a single racist in America who's watching a football game and is like, "Oh, end racism. I better reconsider my views." So I actually used to say they're never going to take this thing off the field because it'll attract too much attention to take it off, but it does no good. So I don't care the least about taking end racism off. And I would say that the NFL, and they defended their DEI efforts. There's no institution in America with a less genuine series of DEI efforts than the NFL. Like the Rooney Rule for coaches, it's like, it's the biggest farce in the history of DEI. These people, these poor coaches who are dragged out when everybody knows who's going to be picked.
I was joking with somebody. I was like, poor Byron Leftwich. Like,
yeah,
he's been Rudy ruled into now is just like, they should just rename it the Byron Leftwich rule.
Well, if I were him, I would be like,
for every job.
I need 4 extra days and I need to be at the Ritz-Carlton in fucking Jacksonville.
Yeah, at least give me give me a good hotel room.
Well, okay, but let's trace the lineage of from BLM with the NFL to DEI, right? Because where were we a few years ago? Roger Goodell was supposedly very upset that some people weren't standing for the anthem, and he was absolutely not going to allow anybody to say Black Lives Matter. He was not going to have that anywhere near the NFL. And then, by the way, Ravi, for all the stuff you say, the turning point in that is when Patrick Mahomes decided to come out and say, it is important that we acknowledge that Black Lives Matter. Like, so for all the people who want to say that he's some sort of MAGA guy, like, it was Mahomes who did that. Now, then the NFL went, oh crap, the face of the league is saying this. And then that brought forth like a huge outpour of everybody else going, okay, if he's doing it, I'm going to do it. And then they said, okay, we're going to put these, slogans on end zones and on helmets or whatever, which is pretty well meaningless, but symbolic. And then now the DEI stuff comes down, and it feels like everybody who wants to curry favor with Trump is got to genuflect and say, we're not going to have any DEI. And then the NFL is now on the other end of it. And they're like, we can't remove that because, so it's interesting, the direction and the journey that is. I mean, it's meaningless, but yet still a journey that it has traveled.
It's a backlash against it's obviously this happens every time there's some progress on racial justice, civil rights, social justice, basically of any kind in America. There is a backlash. We are in the backlash moment, and Trump embodies it. And he won the election. So whether or not a majority of it wasn't a majority. It was 49.9% of the voters. But whatever, he's clearly the president and was duly elected. He is leading the charge, and it is interesting that I think 2 things. One is the NFL follows, like the leagues follow. They're following the politics now to some extent. They follow their stars, but like they are going to get dragged into this for the most part. I think the NBA might be, and WNBA might be the only example of a league that maybe tries to get ahead of these things. But but the NFL, without question, they are following, and they followed Mahomes and their stars back in 2020. And now they're, to the extent they can, following Trump. But I do think it's pretty interesting that Goodell, I watched that because when I saw the news story come out, I was like, whoa. And I watched it, and like he was treading very carefully, but like he didn't he didn't step back. Like you said, he was like, we need to do this. Now, if this is the Rooney rule, like great, but it still shows that we took, maybe we took 3 steps forward and 2.5 steps back, but maybe there's a half step forward there with respect to the NFL and this kind of DEI stuff. And that's not nothing, even though we're definitely in a moment where maybe there are more steps backward to be taken.
Well, let's stay on the Trump thing for a second, because let's remember when Trump goes to these sporting events, right? He goes, and we're going to talk about that in a second. He goes to the UFC, does all this stuff. And we, as the three of us, as people who are into sports and everything, but also, at least by background, if, sometimes still by profession, political professionals, it is hard to remove yourself sometimes from the fact that the presidency is an institution, regardless of who is in it. And that most people, most normal Americans, like I'd say 60, 70%, when they think about the presidency, they don't just think about the president at that time, meaning the president, even if it's somebody you really, really dislike, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, somebody you really, really dislike, conventionally in American history, when the president shows up to something, it's a big deal and it's exciting for you. So when people, end up taking pictures with the president, whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump, oftentimes regular people, and often athletes and athletes' families, are regular people who have been so consumed with that pursuit that they've not been like, who knows if they're even voting a lot of the time, to be honest, that when the president shows up, you take a picture with the president. That's how it's always gone. Like, the president used to call the World Series winning manager and talk to them live. And who knows whether the World Series winning manager had voted for them. Nobody actually cared or thought about it 30 years ago. So I'm just saying, like, I think we all have to be somewhat careful to not make a judgment about people's politics based on the fact that they shook the president of the United States hand and things like that. I think we should pump the brakes on that sometimes a little bit. It's more fair to people. And I'm not just talking about the Chiefs, talking about anybody.
No, I'm with you. And the biggest divide in politics now is between people who are hyper engaged or engaged at all at some level and people who are disengaged. And most NFL fans, which is the biggest sport in America, most Americans are disengaged. And so to your point, they are respecting to some extent the office and not the person in it, whether that's Biden, Trump, Obama, Bush, you name it. But it's changing. It certainly has changed over the last 10, 12 years. And it's not a good thing, I think. And Trump, to some extent, and I will say Obama too, and other, like, who the people who have been, I think Trump is a legitimate sports fan. I think Obama certainly a legitimate sports fan. As they lean into it more, inevitably it's going to inject politics into it. But I think, Trump going to a UFC fight. Well, we'll talk. Let's get into that before I go into that, because there is a political statement in there. I think intentional political statement in there, and not just I want to go see a fight. Though it's hard to draw. It's hard to determine when Obama goes to an NBA game where where do you draw the line? It's unclear, but I think it is leaning towards politics, sports being used, like we talked about last week with the hockey game in Canada, as like an arena to do politics, as opposed to by the politicians, if not by the fans.
Yeah, I think you always. I think it's smart. Trump has an instinct always to go where he can get attention, and I think it's generally smart. I do think there's a risk, and I think this is a risk that Taylor Swift is facing now, which is sometimes you just invite a whole level of acrimony that you might not want. And I think a good example is, he's not running again, but attacking a swing state is not great politics. They're number one team, and maybe he just doesn't care about the politics anymore, but you can overexpose yourself. One last piece on the Super Bowl before we move on to our next story is the halftime show. And so you had Kendrick Lamar performing, and I was struck by how often with these halftime shows, it's just an opportunity for people to complain. Like how often are the halftime shows like everybody's just like, oh, that was an awesome halftime show. Like I just always think it's some reason to complain. And I think in this case, it's people like my mom who don't know who Kendrick Lamar is. And they're like, this is trash, right? This is what I hear. The other part of this is I think there's a limit to how much you just beat up on one person. And I think with the Drake stuff, I think this is bullying at this point. Like, even though this is a famous rich person, how like what are we going to say enough is enough making fun of Drake? They rolled out his ex-girlfriend in Serena Williams to dance to the diss track that calls him a pedophile. Shout out to Mike Gottlieb, our friend who's representing Drake in the defamation case. I don't know. This is too much for me. I'm throwing in the towel for Drake.
Can I ask an embarrassing white guy question? Which is, what did this start over? I don't know. Like, I'm aware. I've been aware. There's a.
Do you have an hour?
Like, if you go back to like my, my youth, like I understand why West Coast, East Coast didn't like each other. Whatever. This seems like it's more just like, I don't like you. Like, it's high school stuff. Like, what?
It's producer. I don't have enough time.
It's professional rivalry stuff, right?
It's a professional rivalry.
All it is. Okay,
yeah.
That's so much more boring to me. And feels not worthy of putting into a halftime show.
But the music that came from it, put aside Kendrick's, performance at the Super Bowl, we'll get back to it, was really good. Like, Drake's music was really good and Kendrick's music was really good. And it was, people basically are saying that, it was the best rap beef of all time, not because of actually the substance behind the conflict, though there's some obviously salacious things there, but it actually because the music was really good, particularly that song, which became, I would say, the most popular song in America for a few weeks last year. So it's really, really, really messed up, to Ravi's point, that like I couldn't watch. Like, I was actually covering my eyes. And
you're a Toronto guy, so this is one of your guys.
From the Six. Like, I like Drake. Like, Drake would be a great halftime performer. He has a lot of pop, great pop songs. He's obviously one of the biggest artists in the world. So it was truly hard for me to watch him just get absolutely roasted. And to Ravi's, I think, point, this was like the end. Like, enough is it? Like, at this, I was like, "You've won, Kendrick. Like stop kicking the dead body." Like,
well, let's get into
it's over.
Well,
so maybe that's it. Maybe this is the end. Finally.
Well, here's an interesting part of this, Jason, is that Drake is suing his own record label, because his record label represents Kendrick Lamar also. And in Kendrick Lamar's lyrics, he explicitly calls Drake a pedophile, right? Now, it's music, and there's a whole lot going on here. And our good friend, Mike Gottlieb, is representing Drake, and Gottlieb had represented the people who sued Giuliani successfully too. He's a really good lawyer. This is a tough case. But if it wasn't music and you were just calling somebody a pedophile, right? And there was like some incident where somebody tried to break into Drake's house or something, it's going to be an interesting case. Now, I really hope he doesn't succeed, because you want that kind of level. Like, it's an art form. You want people to be able to like trade barbs back and forth that way. But it is a fascinating
I don't know. I'm not sure that art demands that, but
I don't know. Beef can be fun, but to your point, like that. But when people start dying or getting defamed, that might be a little much.
So it could be an interesting case now where Drake could come out really well here. And I was actually watching to see if they would perform, because if they didn't perform the song, it would be an indication that they're trying to limit their downside here. But one more thing on this, which is, I sent this to you guys right before the podcast, so we'll talk more about Stephen A in a second. But he commented on Serena showing up to this, and he said, "If I'm married and my wife is going to join trolling her ex, go back to his ass, because clearly you don't belong with me." So meaning, like, if you're still that caught up on your ex, maybe you should just go back with him.
Shout out to Stephen A for getting in every. I mean, the man is. He knows how to get into a discussion.
I don't want to I don't want to jump ahead, but like, he's figured out that whole be part of everything Trump move.
For sure.
So, I mean, wow. I don't have a comment on Stephen A's comment.
I don't, not really. I mean, I'm sure Alexis Ohanian is doing just fine. He's probably married to? Yeah, that's who I think he's referencing. That's who I think he's referencing, is like, he wouldn't want his wife to go do that. I'm like, Serena can do it. First of all, she's a grown ass woman. Second of all, he's doing just fine. They're I'm sure secure in their relationship. And third, it's the biggest stage in the world. Like it's, if you're promoting yourself ultimately. So, and she's been retired for a couple of years. So do you, Serena? I would never talk shit about Serena.
There's a corollary.
She was just showing people like, also I can dance. Like that seems to me the point of it for her.
I think she violated, Cardinal Ravi Gupta rule, which is less applicable to both of you, given how long you've been with your wives. But I have a few ex-girlfriends, and my cardinal rule is never diss the ex, never. Like I just never go. You never go ahead. And lovely people. There was Jason. I sent you a story last week where one of my ex-girlfriend's husband is running Doge, and I had a bunch of people. I had a bunch of people sending me messages saying negative things, and my party line was very lovely. Wish them the best. That's how I operate in such circumstances.
Unfortunately, luckily for you, the whole world doesn't already know about the terms of your breakup, so a little bit different. Yeah. But I to be clear, I haven't had an ex, or I've been married or with my wife for almost 20 years, but I adopt the same rule. I love all my exes. They're all wonderful, wonderful people.
Mine were all in high school. Diana and I met. We were 17 when we met. So if I were to diss an ex, I think people would find it to be rather out of the blue and weird.
Well, Jason, let's get to our number 3 story. This is a baseball one. So why don't you tee this one up?
All right. Yes. So Shohei Ohtani's interpreter was sentenced and will be made to pay restitution from the multi-million-dollar gambling scandal. For those who don't remember, it was almost a year ago. Ippei Mizuhara, which is Shohei Ohtani's interpreter, he basically was illegally transferring funds from Ohtani's bank account to bookmakers. And it was about 40 times. He was posing as Ohtani on phone calls with bank officials. Basically, it turned out that his interpreter, that Ippei, was a compulsive gambler, but with Ohtani's money. And it turns out that Ippei, he says, became addicted to sports gambling through an illegal site run by this guy, Matthew Bowyer, starting in 2021. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, sports betting not legal in California, right, Adisu?
Nope.
Yeah, okay. So, and he found himself
much to my chagrin.
Yeah, and then he found himself stealing money to pay off debts and then continue gambling, stealing money from Shohei. Over a 3-year period, reports showed that he won nearly $142 million in bets, but lost $183 million, losing $41 million in the process of making, get this, over 19,000 bets. I wanted us to talk about this because when this broke, a lot of people were like, some people who just root for bad things to happen were excited because they thought Ohtani was going to get in trouble. And Ohtani's kind of a golden boy who has only really ever thought about baseball. And they were like, oh, look, he has a bad. Sometimes a lot of people, will feel better when good people do bad things. So that's one aspect of it. But then there were people like me who were really worried, like, is this going to come back to Ohtani? Because I'm a huge baseball fan, and I'm also the kind of baseball fan where I'm evangelical about baseball. And here we have this guy who is probably the greatest baseball player ever and seems to also be like a lovely person. And it was like, oh my God, is this going to be the huge scandal that brings him down? And I think a year later, we can all look back at it, and it really appears that he is as squeaky clean as it appeared, and that he was massively taken advantage of by this guy. But it was the biggest story in the world for like a week, and now we're like, oh yeah, that thing.
It's wild. It's truly wild. I think he is, part of this is because he's Japanese. He doesn't speak, great English, and so it's a little less relatable probably to the most American fans. But to have, if this were LeBron James or Pat Mahomes, pick your biggest star of the sport. That's what it was embroiled in a gambling scandal, or at least what at first could have been a scandal. It would have been the biggest news for months. It would have been the biggest news for years, possibly, like OJ trial stuff. But it's, I think, it is pretty amazing, that it wasn't. That's really good PR work by Ohtani's team. Like really good PR work by Ohtani's team. And it is.
Do you remember, by the way, what happened is at first Ipe said, because he was starting to get in trouble. So at first his statements were, "Oh yeah, he knew that I was doing it," and then a lot of the conspiracy stuff was that he very quickly said no, he didn't know. So the PR work was, in addition to, I guess, the FBI getting him to tell the truth, it was also the PR people being like, "Dude, if you want any help from us ever, you're going to tell the truth publicly right now."
Exactly. And this isn't a terrible. I mean, the man deserves to be punished and severely punished, but like what was the final sentence? I forget.
Let's see, five years, I think. Let's see,
5 years in federal prison. Like,
yeah, in order to pay 17 million in restitution.
Yeah, which
to
good luck.
Ohtani.
Good luck getting
Yeah.
to Shohei for ever getting that money. But it's a severe but not overly severe punishment for the scale of what this could have been to sports, to baseball, to sports, to Ohtani, to it's pretty amazing that it has basically gone out with a whimper and not a bang.
What it made me think about is, ever since it happened, is the experience of somebody like Ohtani or somebody like Ichiro when he first came over, of you come into a foreign country, and it's one thing, like, we've all traveled to another country. At some points, probably all of us have lived in another country. But to do that and be entirely reliant on basically a single person for everything you do, to help you with your banking, to help you with every interaction you have. Oh, and to at the same time be one of the most famous people in the world, and certainly in the new country. Like, what a uniquely vulnerable experience.
If I sent you to Japan and I was like, this is your one person, that person could do a lot of damage.
You would have no trust or no choice but to trust that person entirely. Like, did you ever see that movie, Mr. Baseball?
Not
Tom
forever.
Selleck. It's such a good little movie. And and he's got the interpreter at the beginning of the movie, the whole movie, who is interpreting for him to the team and trying to clean up everything he's saying all the time, and it's like, Selleck can do nothing about it, right? And so, and as someone who has used an interpreter in a completely different context in the military, for relied entirely on them, they're not just like a translator of your words. They are your cultural guide. They are everything you know about the culture, everything that you know about how to not make errors. It all comes from them. And so anyway, I wanted to revisit it a year later and just talk about the fact that somehow baseball survived that, whereas that guy Ipe was very incentivized to be like, no, it wasn't me, it was him, because I'm sure that investigators would have loved to have bust something like that.
Well, let's get to story number 4, which is just the NBA trade deadline has passed, and there's some shenanigans going on here. The Lakers traded a couple of players, including Dalton Knecht, who is their first-round pick, who seemed like a good player, with some picks, and Cam Reddish to the Hornets for Mark Williams, who's a really tall center who has a history of injury problems. And in a rare moment, the Lakers are sending Williams back because he failed the physical.
They bought a lemon. They bought a lemon.
I'm going to read the Hornets statement because it's really funny to me. We're excited to welcome Mark back to our Hornets organization. After the other team aggressively pursued Mark, we made the difficult decision to move him. We've always had great respect for Mark's talent, work ethic, and character. We're thrilled to see him rejoin our roster as a dynamic presence at the starting center position. His return strengthens our team, and we look forward to the impact he will make on and off the court. Huh.
Then why'd you trade him, guys?
Yeah,
just
awkward. Yeah,
it just sucks. I mean, I'm not sure who it sucks for more. I'm pretty sure it's Mark. Like, I mean, now, like, the jeers, the pressure are all going to be there, right? And I'm trying to think, what is a relatable experience outside of sports?
There's something in the back of all of our heads, but I can't really. It's like quitting your job for another job and then not getting the other job. But But I think like you guys don't probably watch RDC World. It's this YouTube page by this guy Mark Phillips, who's really really funny, and he does like parody videos for sports mainly. And he did a video of the Anthony Davis trade where LeBron, basically the whole like thing is like LeBron is pretending like he's in the locker room with Davis. He's pretending to be upset. And then he basically sends Davis on his way, and then on the other door opens the door and basically like warmly welcomes Luka. But then Anthony Davis forgot something in the locker room and walks in and sees him embracing Luka, and he's like, it's like awkward moment. That made me think of that.
This is 10 times more awkward. I mean, because Connect apparently was in Charlotte, like ready to start, playing for the Hornets. And there's like
he's the real winner here, going back to LA on the Luka team. That's
true. But he's pretty good, exactly. And LA, no offense to Charlotte, but he's a 21-year-old kid playing for the Lakers in LA is probably
but he's in the same position to some extent, right?
Yeah.
Although I think it was generally thought of within NBA circles as the Lakers giving up an asset that they valued. For to take a shot on Williams, who has played something like 80 games in his 3 years. Like he's been perennially injured, right? So the Lakers were the ones rolling the dice here. They didn't, I think Connect will be welcomed back with open arms because they didn't really want to get rid of him in the first place. It's Williams who was sold off and now is perceived as a lemon and is coming right back to Charlotte with this ridiculous, hilarious statement. And he is going to start for them, but they're trash. They're like one of the 3 worst teams in the league or 4 worst teams in the league. So what a whiplash for that guy, from going to playing with Luka and LeBron catching lobs to like back to basketball purgatory.
Let's get to
hold on. Real quick. I was at the Lakers Pacers game in Indianapolis like a few days before the big trade that brought Anthony Davis to LA, where they traded, Ingram and Kuzma and all those guys. And there were tons of rumors that it was going to happen, as you recall. And like everybody was just waiting for when it was going to happen. And then the crowd was every time anybody other than LeBron came to the free throw line, the entire crowd, this was in Indianapolis, was chanting, LeBron's going to trade you. LeBron's going to trade you. And it was like unbelievable. And I was there like as a LeBron fan. Like I was just like, this is crazy. Anyway.
The trade deadline, I mean, did you guys see Dennis Schroeder's comments about slavery, and who was a Warrior at the time and has since been, he said, free agency or I should say trade deadline, NBA is like modern slavery. It's a little much, but more than a little much, right? You sign a contract, like, trading, et cetera. But it is pretty like wild that 2/3 of the league, I mean, now with Luka being traded, maybe 100% of the league, but 2/3 of the league for like a whole month is walking on pins and needles, worried that they might have to move their family, their everything they've known and what have you, to go to somewhere that they can't even predict. Like it is, they're getting paid millions of dollars. It's part of it, but it is very dehumanizing to just like, and now that the trade deadline is passed, God bless, like they get to, everyone gets to settle down. But man, those locker rooms have got to be just not just, the Lakers back then for sure, but in general, they've got to be just always just like, a little antsy.
What would it be like if like in your job, like in your regular job, there was like a month out of every year where you knew that
it is relevant in politics.
Actually, it's kind of like that now, true. Like with layoffs and stuff.
Disu and I were both on the 2008 campaign, where without a doubt, depending on how a given primary would be going on, we were on different sides in the primary, and we would see each other. I think you were in Connecticut. I was in Connecticut at one point. Like you had no idea where you're going to be the next month. And we didn't have private jets. It was like basically I had a Toyota Avalon or something, or Toyota Camry, and I basically had my whole life in it. The car wound up getting stolen with all my belongings in it, but I would just pack it up, go to the next state. Sometimes it would be Ohio, Pennsylvania, Connecticut. I was everywhere. Iowa at a certain point. Yeah, I remember when we won Iowa, they were like, "We're going to send you to Charleston, South Carolina." And so I was in Charleston. And then at some point they decided I think it was on my way to Charleston, that I needed to stop in Vegas which is not on the way to Charleston. So I had to go all the way to Vegas.
Actually, the same thing happened to me in 2004. I was going to go to Michigan, and then they sent me to Arizona. And I was like, those are not.
But see, what's crazier about this is it's not like we're sending you to this different place. It's like we're sending you to this different place, and now you work for the Edwards campaign. It's like so that is truly wild.
And also, you live there, and for the next 3 years.
But also, here's millions of dollars.
Congratulations!
That's better.
It's fair.
That does help, I would imagine.
Well, okay. One last piece here. Story number 5. Stephen A. Smith.
Oh, here we go. Here we go.
He's
our once and future leader.
His contract is up for renegotiation at ESPN, which has been a source of a lot of commentary. But he's also being speculated for another role here. Let's go to a clip.
And you came to me and you said to me, as the American people, that you wanted me to be your nominee for the presidency of the United States of America. I have to confess to you, it is something I would consider. I didn't say I'd do it. I didn't say I'd want to do it.
Okay. Amazing.
Wow.
So I don't
discuss.
even know what to
Jason,
say.
discuss.
First of all, is this all part of a contract negotiation? Or let's not even go into that first. Let's take it at face value for a moment, for fun. He would run as a Democrat, I guess, in the primary. He's pretty well said. And he's done this by, Ravi, you've been saying on our other show a lot that the next nominee will probably get there by running against the party. He's been pretty well doing that. At the same time, there's also this thing that a lot of Democrats talk about and the media talks about, which is, do Democrats need their own Joe Rogan, their own person who can talk to men? I mean, you know, look, is this a totally crazy idea? I'm not sure.
What is the first state do you sue this year for the first time ever in the primary?
South Carolina.
And what is Stephen A. Smith?
Black.
He's black.
Last time I checked.
I was like,
what else is he?
Really the fill in the blank?
What else is he? He's really famous.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll add a fourth to this. He knows exactly how to insert himself into the conversation as we've already established here. So you put those 4 things together with a fifth, which is there's a permission structure now for totally unconventional candidates. And I think we've got ourselves something potentially serious here if he wanted to do it.
I 100,000% agree. It is not, I mean, I think you're 100% right that sort of we're in a moment not unlike 04 to 08 in the Democratic Party where an outside, there's a throw the bums out internally to the Democratic Party vibe. Like these guys, we're getting old and tired and stale and we need something new, which is what Obama ran against and successfully so. And a moment where celebrity politicians have a huge advantage or celebrities have a huge advantage in politics because, Chris Hayes has the new attention. I haven't read it yet, but the new attention economy book. But I completely agree that the hardest thing to get in a fractured media environment is attention. And Stephen A. Smith can get attention. He is a great orator. He in his own way. He is a great, provocateur. It's literally what he's built his entire career on. He's also a very bright guy. Like he is not to be trifled with. I think he should be taken very seriously. We all laughed, myself included, at Donald Trump in 2015. And he is now the 2-time elected president running essentially a similar campaign from the right if he were to do it. So I'm like, not saying I'm all in for it, but like, it is not a joke. I learned my lesson, 10 years ago.
Here's what we're going to see. There's going to be that ESPN morning show, 12 people on the debate stage, Hollywood Squares style debate going on. And Pete Buttigieg and Chris Murphy are going to be debating the finer points of, foreign policy or something. And Stephen A. Smith is going to be, let me tell you something. And then he's going to do his whole thing. And that's all you're going to remember from the night. That's all the average voter is going to remember. And I think that's a superpower.
Look, I'm not opposed to this at all. And if you think about it, like when you go back to the founding fathers who were deeply flawed, like, how did a lot of them end up at the and or like, not even founding fathers, but like go a generation later? How did a lot of them end up able to be president? Probably they were the most entertaining, because what was it back then? What was politics? It was entertainment, because there wasn't shit going on. So when people came to give speeches, you showed up to listen to the speeches, and the speeches lasted 2 hours because there was no television or internet or radio or anything like that. So I mean, we can act like this is a whole new phenomenon, right? Now, many things about Trump are, in my opinion, both new and bad. But the idea of like people who are compelling and entertaining becoming leaders, that's not new. And I mean, one thing I do find funny about it is that he cites some poll that has him at 2%, which I'm sure could easily grow. But it did remind me of a moment that I had with Obama when he was talking to me about running, and I was talking to him about me running, where he was explaining to me that we had a lot of work to do, or I had a lot of work to do, because nobody knew, in his words, who the fuck you are. And I said, well, there was a poll not long ago that had me at 4% in Iowa. And he just cut me off and goes, nobody knows who the fuck you are. And I go, yeah, you're right. So it's just funny to me. I don't know. Nothing to do with Stephen A. Smith. It's just a funny moment that I recalled.
But that's the thing. You can't, it's really hard to become universally famous in America now, because people run in their own media circles. And so, it used to be, I was talking with my 20-year-old niece about this over the holidays. Like, y'all remember when Michael Jackson put out the Dangerous album? And I believe that Black or White, when that music video, wow, I'm really dating myself.
I remember watching it on
TV. Yeah, it was amazing.
Right? It was, but it was literally on Fox primetime.
Primetime,
it was a primetime special on network television.
Yes, I do remember that.
And it was like a 30-minute long thing. And, I talked about the OJ trial, which like was the only thing on news for a year. That just doesn't happen anymore. Like, news cycles are too fast and media environment is too. So like what Stephen A. Smith has that all these senators and congressmen and what have you don't, is people know who he is, right? I would guess his name recognition is higher than most potential Democratic candidates as of today, right? And you look at the last, certainly in 2020, like one of the reasons Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders were the last two Democrats in the race is because they were the two who were the best known from the beginning. One of the reasons Trump won in 2016 is because of The Apprentice, not because he ran some great campaign. It's because he was, on the number one rated television show in America for a few years. So it is, you can't buy, it is not a bad analogy, Jason. Like, you can't buy notoriety, just being known. And, or you can buy it, but it's very expensive, and Stephen A. has it. So take him seriously, guys.
I will say though, I will caveat it with this, which is that he is very famous, but he's also very famous in a real silo. He is sports commentary famous, and that he is the top of the sports commentary silo for fame. But when you think about, which means for a general election, obviously as a Democrat, that is a great spot to be in, right? Because you're going to have a lot of crossover with with men who are more likely to either not vote or to vote Republican. So that there's a lot of advantage there. But in a Democratic primary, he'll have work to do. But I think the thing about him is, I think we all think he's like probably really up to doing that work. Now we've taken this very seriously for a moment. Let's examine, since this show is about the business of sports as well. He has a contract negotiation where he has been very clear that he's approaching it like an athlete. He's like, $100 million. Yeah, that's what I'm worth. Right. And I would have to imagine that this could also be a part of that, of him being like, hey, I'll just go do this.
He's the only guy left on ESPN. Who is ESPN
true.
Anymore? And their whole strategy was like, let the Max Kellerman types go, the Jacobys and Jalen Rose types, who are like that medium tier talent, who I really love. But they're like, it's basically the Bills and Chiefs strategy, where it's like, let the Tyreek Hills go, let the Stephon Diggs go, but keep Mahomes and Allen, basically. And that only works if you have Mahomes and Allen. So ESPN really needs Stephen A. Smith right now, I think.
Yeah, there's not many. He's the biggest star on the, and certainly the highest paid star on the network. And
So
I'm
what
not
I'm
sure
saying
that
is,
running for president though is like precludes him from being on ESPN, does it?
that's true. But what I'm saying is, do you think that okay, so FS1, the others, they probably, given that ESPN has put all their money into Stephen A. Smith, I don't know if he can credibly go to the negotiating table and say, look, I'm gonna get more money from one of them. Maybe he can, but if he
The
can't, then
streamers is who you watch out for.
yeah, I guess that's true. The Netflix, that's true. But I mean, is part of it could be just introducing another one, but like it also could just be no different than with Trump. It's like, well, I've conquered this. I guess it's this now.
This is actually dangerous in some ways for his market value. Because think about Bezos. Think about Bezos at Amazon. Like, absent all of this, maybe Bezos, they've been trying to, they had their election night coverage they wanted to do. Netflix has been trying to do live sports. They got, unlimited amounts of money. They could have tried to make a play for Stephen A. Smith. But if he's running against whoever the Republican standard bearer is, against a party who has shown that they're willing to use the government to punish their enemies and have successfully subdued a lot of these social media companies, they probably don't want to go anywhere near on-air personality who's going to be running for office in that way. So this could backfire.
I think he's bored.
I think so too.
I think he's climbed the mountain many, many times. Like you said, there's nobody left over there. He could go to another one and he could do it. But if he goes, he's just going to go do what he does again.
There are only so many white dudes to spar with that who is left.
Right. I mean, like, it's also
he's knocked them all out.
Yeah. But it's also like, okay, so if you're him, you're like, okay, the next mountain to climb for me, I guess, is I go and I create sports commentary at Netflix and it takes over the world, or at Amazon, it takes over the world. Okay. That will be basically the same day-to-day I have now. And this has become easy for me. And if you combine that with giving him the benefit of the doubt, maybe he truly is as upset as he seems. I mean, he chose electively to go out and speak about the country and speak about the Democratic Party, which prompted this stuff. I think it's possible that this dude is like, now I need to be president.
Well, we should switch with him. We're bored of politics.
Yeah, totally.
I'll go on first take. I gotta sharpen up my high school debate skills, but shit, bring it. Let's go.
Well, all right, Jason, take us to our deep segment of the
okay.
Of the week.
Okay, for our deep dive, okay. First of all, best of luck to Stephen A. We look forward to seeing him out there. And the very things that many might want someone like him to bring to the political arena, the brashness, the trash talking, all that stuff, they're also increasingly missing from professional sports. And it's more than just, not having the hard hits because football changing the rules. We're seeing rivalries slipping away, players acting a lot more like politicians and the way that they're media trained. So we wanted to talk about, how is this affecting professional sports and their watchability? Are they losing their edge? And is it becoming a little less entertaining as a result? And I introduced this as a potential deep dive segment because I was watching Eric Hosmer, who, former major leaguer, has a podcast where he had George Brett, my childhood hero, the Royals only Hall of Famer, on, and he was talking about the rivalries from the 70s and the 80s and how anyway, let's just play the clip. You'll see.
I just think the players are too friendly with one another. I don't think the Royals all last year, they didn't have one bench clearing incident, and they haven't had one this year. And that can happen.
Yeah. I mean,
you can't, especially when you lose 106 games in 1 year, you can't go through a season without fighting back.
Yeah. 14 and 15,
you did.
I felt like we fought every other week.
It was like every series.
Yeah. At least once.
Every series.
We also were a family, and like, if anybody did anything to one of us, we're doing it.
Well, you saw what it was when the guy, Brett Lowry, slid into Escobar.
Oh, yeah.
That wasn't even that bad of a slide, but it hurt Esco.
Oh, yeah.
It hurt him. And then everybody took offense to it. It was amazing.
So George Brett is basically like, I'm very upset that my team didn't get in a bench clearing brawl all of last year. And anyway, but that's old school. Like, that's how it used to be. George Brett still talks to this day about how much he hated the Yankees in the 70s and 80s and how he still hates the Yankees as much as he likes New York, right? So I just, are we missing this part of it?
Yes. I think this is a particular problem in the NBA. But you think about, for instance, like the NFL has never been in a better position, but it is annoying that Josh Allen and Lamar are talking like they're best buds, and Mahomes, and they're like, I wish him the best. He should be the MVP. And you're like, come on, that's not what you actually think. Like, you guys all are like fierce competitors. And we were talking about F1 last week. It's just refreshing in F1 and tennis that people just talk shit. And I think the NBA, which has become the most extreme version of this, the sanitizing, the lack of any interesting rivalry whatsoever, other than like whatever we can concoct through personalities like Stephen A. Smith, who create the sharp edges where they don't exist. It's like, it's just super rare that people have anything pointed to say about each other. And you got to remember what the history here is. Muhammad Ali, the Knicks with Van Gundy, like being dragged across the court, like these people would be saying very sharp, very interesting things, and they don't have to pretend. This is what they actually think and say behind the scenes, and I think they should let it out more.
I think there are very good reasons why it's not happening, right? I think in the NBA and in other sports, I think the NBA in particular, because the trend towards individuals as brands, right, is a real thing. And my son wants to say, no, but you guys can take over. I have an interruption from a 3-year-old.
Yeah, no problem. No, I think you're right about the individuals as brands. So they do have to approach things a little more like politicians. But I think there's this other element with free agency where you don't know where you're going to go next. So
that's right.
So if like a lot of my reference points are baseball, right? So you have things like Jazz Chisholm last year, like during the playoffs last year between the Yankees and the Royals. Jazz Chisholm said that in the game where the Royals beat the Yankees, that the Royals got lucky, right? And then when they came back, Kansas City fans were pretty Midwestern. We're not going to boo anybody ever on our team, but if you say something bad about our city or our team and you're visiting, we're going to boo you. Like, there was, back when our teams were terrible, the one thing we had going for us was we got the All-Star game, like, I don't know, 15 years ago. And Robinson Cano said that he wasn't going to draft Billy Butler in the pick your team home run derby. And Billy Butler, who neither of you have probably ever even heard of, was our one All-Star that year. Okay, at DCU, Billy
he was
Butler.
an A. He was an Oakland.
Yeah, he was
A,
an A.
so,
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So but anyway, so like if Cano had ever wanted to come to the Royals, it would have been difficult. And like, Chisholm's a free agent. Royals probably can't afford him, but it was like, well, is there a possibility that we could still bring him in? It happened with Stroman going to the Yankees after Stroman had said the one place I'll never go is to the Yankees. He did. So I guess my point is, like, I think part of it is they're like, well, I don't want to limit any of my options as to places I can go.
I think that's, and they have the other, I was going to make that point, as well as agencies, right? A lot of these players, especially in the NBA, but I think that's true in every sport, are represented by the same people. So you end up making friends because you share representation. You're not going to get in a rivalry with somebody who's also represented by CAA or Clutch or what have you. And as those agencies have consolidated, you end up with, I think, the rivalries that exist might actually be agency to agency, at that
that's
level,
true.
as opposed to player to player.
But think about the Lamar, the Kendrick versus Drake. It's the same record company, so it is possible. And look at how that worked out. Like, yeah, it's not great for Drake, but it's good for record sales. Like, it's good for the music industry.
I agree.
Isn't it possible that, like, that stuff like that is somewhat contrived? I mean, not entirely.
I'm for the contrived, though. Like,
yeah, that's true.
The WWE. That's boxing. This stuff works.
I was going to bring that up. MMA, I think, is real. Like, they actually have beef because they're going to fight and they have to. But WWE, not a sport, obviously, but sports entertainment, boxing, which I don't think they're trying to. There's like a code of conduct in boxing where you're not trying to kill the other guy, you're trying to, win, as opposed to MMA. But they all have figured this out somehow, and I think the team sports have gotten, like we're talking about F1, tennis, individual sports. It's the team sports where we've lost it. And you think back to the 80s, 90s when we were growing up, the rivalries between the Bad Boy Pistons and the Bulls, or the Knicks and the Heat in the 90s. I mean, those people they didn't care that they might be represented by the same folks. And last thing I'll bring up on the NBA, and I wonder if this is true in football and other places, is a lot of these folks come up through AAU programs where they've all known each other since they were children. Right. And so like literal children, like 13 years old, they've been playing together. And, the NBA is only 450 players, most of whom are from the United States. Like they've known each other since they were kids. So it's hard to disassociate that
can
from
cut both
your
ways. You know this
life.
from F1 and Disu is like a lot of these guys raced when they were kids and hate each other because they hated each other when they were kids. And that's the best kind of beef.
That's true. Like yeah, you're right.
So
but
I think a big part of it, to your point, Adisu, is like, okay, when you look back at the rules, like in baseball, there's an actual rule that's still on the books, Rule 4.06, against fraternization. They're like you literally, like that's why until recently, you didn't see during batting practice, you didn't see baseball players when they were in their opposing uniforms actually like hanging out on the field. They had to do it in the tunnel. There was a rule against it because they didn't want this kind of thing. But a lot of stuff has changed. Your point is a good one, that as they come up, they're elite athletes, they're finding each other. It used to be like in baseball, like you were a great baseball player, it's because you played, your rec ball, your little league, maybe your team like went to the Little League World Series and got seen that way, but more than likely you played that, and then you got seen because you're a really good high school player playing on your high school team, and maybe you went to college. That's it. Now, just like with AAU ball and basketball, like you play either in perfect game or you play in, one of the other like club tournament programs. You get to know all these other guys. Then you go and you do these camps, and then you go and you play like a lot of, if your family is like, let's say you're from Minnesota and you got that much potential, your family's going to move to Arizona or Florida or Texas or Southern California, and you get a big bunch of guys playing there. But then the other part of it is another thing that has changed is the elite citizenship that comes with being a professional athlete now at the highest level. Whereas when Ted Williams and, Mickey Mantle were playing against each other, I mean, Ted Williams, when he went off to fight in Korea, his salary probably didn't even change that much, So did I just freeze with the thumbs up thing going?
Yeah, you did. It looks
whatever. You can still hear me. And
we
so
can hear you great.
My point is like, it's a hilarious freeze frame. But as a result, like their friends were just as likely to be friends that they had outside of the game. Whereas now, why would you have friends outside of the game how are you going to relate to those people when you're making $1 gazillion and living a certain kind of life? So I think that's part of it too. It's a fraternity now.
Yeah. It goes back to your kind of the Ohtani point, which is like, no new friends when you're rich and famous. And a lot of these, NBA players, team sports players have been famous for a long time. Like they've been, I don't know if you guys follow Overtime on social media, which is, basically a brand that follows basketball players primarily from the time they're in high school. And so, LaMelo Ball, who's now obviously been in the NBA for a few years, but he's been famous since he's been the next big thing since he was 14 years old. He's had a social media following. It's the reason why he almost made the All-Star game this year. So it is easy to be famous young and to then only surround yourself with no new friends, the same people that knew you before you were big. And those people tend to also be fellow athletes, right? So you're not going to start charging the mound when your buddy from your college baseball team or from your high school baseball team throws high and inside on you.
How much more interesting would it be though if instead of when Deshaun Jackson has his thing and everybody's just kind of defending him or not talking about it, that when Lamar Jackson rolls through town, he's like, yeah, this guy's a sex criminal and I'm going to destroy them. Like that would be an amazing, like if Kendrick and Lamar could do it, why can't we do this? Or if when Justin Tucker's trying to kick in Arrowhead, they're making chants about his allegations. Like these are things that would make the sport more interesting.
I agree. I'm going to bring this back to Trump, and bear with me here because I think it's something that he and a few others have, I think, mastered, which is there's a fear, I think, amongst a lot of professional athletes of alienating a group of people, whatever that might be. That might be viewers or purchasers of your endorsement products or endorsers themselves, et cetera. But I think Trump has mastered that you have to have in this world, I think in this sports business world and in this political world, et cetera, you have to have a rabid base. and I don't think that has really made its way to a lot of American team sports yet, which is like, it's okay to have 20-30% of the people hate you. I mean, Stephen A has figured this out, right? People hate him, but they still hate watch him, right? But for some reason, whether it's the agents or the PR reps or the culture that we've created for all the things we've talked about, there's this desire to be like low level liked by everybody, where I actually think the good business maybe in today's sports and in today's world is like have 50% of the people freaking love you and 50% of the people freaking hate you. And that's what Lamar doing that would do. Right. And, at least people are talking about you at that point, and you have to be okay with being hated. And I think there's a lot of fear of being, there's a fear in amongst athletes that is, developed over time, I think, to not wanting to be hated.
But there's a difference, right? Because as a politician, you can make that wager, you can make that gamble because you need 50% plus one vote, right?
Yep.
Or less than that, really, when multiple candidates are running. So you can make that wager. As an athlete, you need as many people as possible because the quote unquote voters, the fans, they're not the ones who are going to make the difference in that calculus. If what you are concerned about individually is sponsorships and endorsements, right? Because then you have to appeal to the broadest. Like Patrick Mahomes is in every commercial on television, and my kids, when we travel, are shocked that he's on every commercial on television in other cities, right? Because my son naturally assumed, it's because we're in Kansas City. No, it's because he has this very broad appeal. And if Patrick Mahomes were out there being like, Josh Allen got it this year, but I'm getting him next year because he's a punk, then he's not doing the State Farm commercial, right? But and that's on the individual level. But then even if you put that aside and you're willing to wager that and you're willing to say, well, you know what, that's fine, I get a nice salary, whatever. Now you've got the league is worried about their own sponsorships and their own corporate relationships. And if they have everybody doing that, and then you've got, brands that are like, we don't want to be associated with that. Now they're losing money. So at the end of the day, like most things, Ravi, I think it comes down to dollars. And while it's more fun for us to see it, the league doesn't make, and the players don't make more money when it happens.
I think they would, though. I think that they're individual players, and I think reminds me of the NBA in the late 80s and early 90s, where you had the Bad Boy Pistons, you had Charles Barkley, you had the Bulls, you had Larry Bird, Magic Johnson. I think the bargain usually in most sports should be that, like, the elite don't need to play this game, right? They're Hulk Hogan, they're the good guys, whatever. But once you go down tiers, you should be incentivized to create attention for yourself.
I think that's kind of the case, isn't it?
It's just not enough, though. That's the thing.
You're like, I just want more bad behavior.
Well, it's not even close. What was the guy's name, Adisu, who was like messing with LeBron? He's basically has been sent to Siberia.
Lance Stevenson.
Well, no, not him. He's funny. No, the guy from Memphis. He was in Memphis. He was talking shit to LeBron on the court. Yeah, you don't even know who he is now.
He's gone.
He's been disappeared from the NBA. But like the good example here is tennis.
Stevenson,
right?
by the way, is a funny one. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier, because then he ended up on the Lakers for a bit.
Yeah,
and, true. And it was awkward. But anyway, go ahead.
Tennis. I keep coming back to tennis because they have Nick Kyrgios, who is the perfect example of this. And actually, Djokovic before he was elite was this too. Like when he was kind of on the rise, but. Kyrgios is a guy who never quite made it as like an elite tennis player. Very talented, but very troubled in many ways. Kind of like the Charles Barkley of tennis. He talks all kinds of shit all the time. And he's actually the biggest draw on TV in a lot of tournaments because he mixes things up at a time. Djokovic was like this for a period of time too. In a weird way, Aaron Rodgers, even though he doesn't talk shit about other players, his off-field craziness, actually, to me, as a person who enjoyed watching the downfall of the Jets, was an amazing sideshow to the NBA, the NFL season. I think these things, like if you think about like the Jordan trajectory, how much more exciting was the Jordan story in Last Dance given there was a Pistons team, like that there
Yeah.
was a real set of villains, right? If they were sanitized, that story is way less interesting.
It's safety in numbers. You can do it a lot more when it's a whole team, right? And I imagine that culture didn't exclusively come from the players. It had to have come from the top in some fashion, right? Coaching, that kind of thing. And also back then, the NBA was fighting for market share in a much bigger way, right? So storylines helped and that sort of thing. But I think there's another element to this, which is the sports where I think you're the least likely to see it. You're seeing it less and less in football. You do see it because football, is played with a lot of passion. So you'll see guys after games say stuff. You'll see, like, was it Sherman a few years ago gave that great post-game interview where he was all fired up and don't even come after me. You see that kind of thing. But for the most part, a lot of guys will clean it up because you go out on that field and you can get killed, right? If somebody's hunting for you. And then in baseball, I think one of the reasons, hey, what's up? Adisu's child.
My sick kid who has entered the chat, but keep going.
And then in baseball, you just frankly have the reality of, if you talk, your job is to 5 times a day stand up there where a guy is throwing an object 100 miles an hour in your direction. And that is a real disincentive to say bad things. A real one.
But I think boxing and MMA, you think about the sports where
they have to hit you anyway, is the point. And also, like,
Right.
you kind of got to get yourself to a point where speaking as somebody who was at one point trained to kill people, like, there's a reason that they gave us targets that were silhouettes instead of targets that looked like targets. They were teaching us to dehumanize the enemy, right? And so there's an element of that, of like, if I think of this person as a human being, it's a lot harder to do my job in a sport like that.
Yeah. I think, like, I guess I'm still on the side of certain sports need it right now. And I think, like, and it's not just like talking crap, it's just being as interesting as you possibly can be. It's like the corollary to what the Democrats need is like more defined, authentic personalities. And I really single out the NBA here more than anything else. For one reason or another, it just seems like the NBA is kind of like a gray goo of amorphous personalities who all talk the same way. Like when you saw the Jason Tatum Netflix special, it was like
the starting 5. Yeah, but what's his name from the Celtics? Who the retired player? God, why is it
Bill Russell?
No, he was like a narrator through the whole thing. I can picture his
Garnett.
face. Yeah, Garnett is exactly what you're talking about. The whole time he was dynamic and he was interesting and he was talking smack but I do think, ironically, one of the reasons that it has faded into the background is because of what we are now engaging in, which is the rise of sports talk, is that it has become, the McAfees and the Stephen A. Smiths and all these folks, they're proxies for all these. Like my friend Nick Wright is the Chiefs proxy on national television. Like, that's his whole, like, not his whole, but because he's a really smart guy who's, I think, very thoughtful, but like, he's a Kansas City guy who his thing is he's going to go out there and he is going to talk all the smack that Mahomes and Kelsey can't talk. And so there is an element of like, well, these guys kind of do the talking and we do the playing.
Draymond, your boy Draymond Adisu is my favorite example. He's the one old school guy left in the NBA that I could point to.
Well, now my Warriors shout out got another one, Jimmy Butler.
Yeah.
But
those guys are good for the sport.
It's few and far. It is fewer and
out
further
in the
between.
starting 5 because he was like not unwilling to just say whatever,
to just
man.
play the game. But I think you're right. I think ultimately people, this is a little personality driven. People come up, they're groomed to be this way. They play with these guys since they're young, all the things we've talked about. And then you have a few standout people who are willing to and have the personalities, honestly, to buck the system. And I think it is 100% correct that people don't just come to see their favorite players. They come to see their least favorite players. When you go to a WWE match, you're there to see the heels lose as much as you're there to see the faces win. And so there are, and plenty of, Charles Barkley, honestly, while a Hall of Fame player, like, was a heel when he was in the league, clearly a heel when he was in the league.
What was it? Not your role model. I'm not a role model.
Yeah, not your role model. Like and now he's on television. Kyrgios, to your point, is probably going to be one of the best. McEnroe, like,
Yeah.
has been
It's a good career
commentator.
decision.
It's a good career decision, right? So
Yeah.
somebody is, and those were elite. I mean, McEnroe, obviously an elite player, but people are going to pick up that mantle. But I agree with Ravi. I think fundamentally, I wish more people would try it and actually, because it feels like it is an intentional watering down of their real personalities, and that you can smell inauthenticity a mile away. And sometimes it just feels like that, and that's both sad and not good business, in my opinion.
This is why I'm a Deion Sanders guy. This is why the Deion Sanders at Colorado, or before that at Jackson State, has been so great. It's why if he does go to the NFL, I am all for it, because he has done it in a way that has bridged the divide, right?
Yeah.
Because he has done it in a way where you look at Deion Sanders and the way he's coaching, and you see him as this guy is a leader of men, and he's setting a really positive example, and he's doing the right things, and he's raising these guys right, and he is a role model, and he takes no shit.
Mm-hmm.
But what does Deion do? What does Coach Prime do that is different? Coach Prime talks tons of shit, but he almost never, not never, but almost never directs it at opposing coaches or players. He directs it at his doubters. And you see, and which allows him to participate in the proxy rivalry battle that is sports talk, right? So he keeps receipts, and all the players do this, and some of them will even comment about it. Like after they win a championship is when they comment about it. You doubted us, whatever. But what they don't do is they don't say the other teams doubted us, they underestimate. They say, you commentators, which I think comes from a place of like, one, it's safe to go after these people. But two, if I'm an athlete at that level, and I've got people who write for a living or go on TV and talk for a living and never really played the game at a high level talking about me. And then I got guys in the opposing locker room whose athletic abilities I respect talking about me. Let me tell you which one I find more aggravating and offensive. It's not the guys whose abilities I respect. It's the guys who could never hang with me, right? So I think that's the shit talk that you get. And I think it's the right shit talk. And it's why I do hope that Sanders becomes a coach. I just hope it's not in the AFC West. I think that'd be great.
It's a good place to end, guys.
It is a good place to end. All right. We've gone a long time, so we'll skip the aging amateur athlete segment and just say you can find us on social media. I think the show even has a handle now. It's like at just go into social media and look for The Game Within, and you'll find it. Adisu, I'm at some point going to memorize your handle. What is it?
It's at Ademissi, ADEMISSIE. Come find me. Yeah.
Okay. And then Ravi is at Ravi M. Gupta on everything. I'm at Jason Kander on everything. Thank you very much for listening, everybody. Tell your friend, the show's new. Tell your friends about it. Send a link to it. Go and review it. Do it in the comments on YouTube. Share it, but also do it wherever you're listening to. If you're listening to it on audio, give it a 5-star review. Thanks for listening. Remember, sports matter. They matter a lot. Talk to you next week.